Welcome to the Emotional Horsemanship Podcast. I am your host, Lockie Phillips, and I help deeply caring equestrians create emotionally balanced horses with science, empathy, and feel. This podcast is a safe place for anyone who desires a better future for horses and for the equestrian lifestyle. I hope that you will enjoy these solo and collaborative episodes where we enjoy a deep insight into our horses' worlds and ways in which we can make that better for them. If you love horses and are willing to do right by them, you're going to love this podcast. And I thank you for being here. Hello everyone. So I just got done with my latest clinic tour this spring. I went to Longmont, Colorado, down to the Hatha Equus Girls at Wild Song Ranch. And then I went to Gig Harbor, Washington State, to the private home of my friend and colleague, Dr. Tracy Rainwaters. Then I flew over to Wisconsin, to just outside of Madison, Wisconsin, to the private home and facility of my friend and colleague, Michelle Knapp, who was also on the podcast. Then I went to Full Circle Farm in Michigan. And then from there, I went to South Carolina to Rocinante Equine down in Johns Island with Claire Aiken and my friend Kim Hallen in South Carolina, who helped me there. Then we went to Mooresville, North Carolina, to the stable of my friend and colleague Stacia Strong. And then finally to Nash Hill Equestrian Center in Gowanda, upstate New York. So these were all American clinics, which has been my focus. And people ask me, why am I not clinicking elsewhere? Firstly, the USA is the largest English-speaking equestrian community closest to me geographically that has a very robust clinic culture. The UK, of course, is the closer English-speaking market, but the USA has a more robust clinic culture. In fact, there are many horse people for whom clinics is their sole avenue for gaining education and training support with their horses. Many people don't often have coaches or instructors, but they'll go to clinics every year. There's just a robust clinic culture in the USA. So in order to travel for clinics, it's much easier for me to create clinics in the USA than it is anywhere else. Next year, I'll be going to 3 countries, not just to one. But the USA has been my focus, and I've managed to obtain the immigration permission to do what I'm doing, right? So that's why I'm focusing on the USA. And so wrapping up this clinic tour, a lot has happened in this clinic tour. And though it might be comfortable for me to wait a little longer before wrapping my thoughts up, I've decided to be vulnerable and to go out on a limb and wrap my thoughts up for you all here on the podcast in real time. As I am wrapping them up myself, I'm going to do that out loud because I think what the world doesn't need is another overconfident horse dude who, quote unquote, has all the answers, right? That's what we don't need. I think what we do need is more service providers who behave more human and are able to show their imperfections. And so I'm going out on a limb here by offering my closing thoughts in regards to the clinic tour, maybe a little bit sooner than I would personally be comfortable doing. But just like the clinics, growth will not come from inside our comfort zone. Comfort zones are important, but that's not where growth happens. Growth happens on the edges, not in the center. So What I did was actually ask you guys on my Facebook group and on my Instagram for whatever questions you have for me about the clinic tour. What do you guys want to know? And so before I do that, I'm just going to give you some numbers. In 6 weeks, I left on the 14th. No, was it the 14th? I left in the middle of April and I'm getting back at the end of May. So it's a 6-week tour away from home. I am traveling on my own. I don't have a companion traveling with me, though I would love that. In 6 weeks, we had a total of 199 ticket holders. This does not include my hosts. My hosts, I had 7 of those. And so just over 200 people attending 7 different clinics. We had 40 participants. Participants are folks who actually do the clinic with their horse, whether they're riding or not. We had 56 premium auditors and we had 103 basic auditors. We had 43 horses and in some places a couple more horses in there. So it's about 45 horses at these clinics because some horses came with buddies or people did the clinic with 2 horses. So those are the numbers. And so now you know the parts and pieces of it. Well, let's look at the questions people were asking me. I'm going to go to my Instagram first and look at the questions you guys offered through Instagram. So hold up just a second as I pull those up. So I'm going to go through your questions, and in the interest of privacy to the persons who did ask the questions, I'm not going to name your names or your accounts based upon who asked the questions, but you did ask them openly, and so I am going to read these questions directly. Okay, the first one's a big question. It said, a few days ago you mentioned having a big shift at the clinic. Can you discuss that more? So that is true. A few days ago on my Instagram stories, I mentioned that the clinic I did in Johns Island on South Carolina constituted a big shift for me. I could go into great depths about it, but in order for me to go into great depths about it, I'm going to have someone else on the podcast with me because the big shift was due to the support I received from a colleague of mine right at the right time. So if you go back on this podcast, you'll find the first ever episode was with my colleague and friend, Laurie Halliday, who's an amazing, amazing horsewoman and a dear friend and colleague of mine. And though she actually flew up and attended the Washington Clinic, and she saw what the program looks like this year, and there are some slight differences to the program this year, Laurie called me during the lunch break of the clinic in Johns Island because she could just feel that I needed to talk with her. And so she did. And I'm going to discuss that in more depth maybe later in this episode or maybe on a different episode because that is something that's a much, much bigger conversation. But basically, a big shift occurred for me at the Johns Island Clinic due to the support I received from my colleague Laurie. And in a nutshell, it enabled me to feel a lot braver about the messages I was delivering to the community at the clinic, whilst at the same time feeling safer as I delivered the messages. Because I've been sitting on the fence for a while about some of the messages I really want to get across to the equestrian community, but just not feeling safe that I could deliver them without having the descending hordes of pitchforks and flaming torches upon me. And so she coached me, Laurie Halliday coached me in a way which enabled me to feel that I had the ability to stand in my integrity much, much firmer, whilst at the same time feeling more protected as I did so. So that was the big shift for me personally. I'm going to move on to the next question. The next question is, have you met any of your own blind spots and how do you deal with that? Yeah. The biggest blind spot I've noticed in myself when I'm teaching at clinics is that I don't say the obvious thing, because the obvious thing for me is obvious. But for others, it might not be obvious. And I assume too quickly that what is obvious for me is obvious for others. One little example today at a clinic was that when I start someone on a process, that's what the process looks like at the beginning. But people often misconstrue what it looks like right now should be the end result. No, the technique that we're doing right now, that's what it looks like right now as you begin competency with something. But that's not the end result. I don't say out loud, hey, this is what it looks like when someone's just starting to play with something. This is not a this is not what it should look like at the very, very end, or what it could look like after lots of repetition and lots of refinement. But this is what it does look like right now. So people will do something right now, and folks watching, or even the people doing it, will assume that that's what it should look like forever, because that's what it looks like right now. And so the obvious piece for me there is all learning is a process, and all high-level skill acquisition journeys start kind of nebulous, start undefined, start looking, rougher or unrefined, and then over time, process, dedication, application, and practice, things start to look better. And the end result is a more extrapolated and refined version of what you started with. Now, for me, that's obvious, but I'm learning that that's not obvious for everybody, because I'm getting questions that kind of confront me in that way. And I have to kind of throw water on my face and say, Lockie, what is obvious for you is not obvious for everybody. So that's been one of my personal biggest blind spots that I've come across this year. Next question. What is the most amazing and most humbling experience on your tour? For me personally, the most amazing and humbling experience, again, was my friend Laurie Halliday essentially calling me out of the blue from across the country because she could feel that I needed it, that I was having sort of a spiritual crisis as a teacher. And she was able to feel that and just step in. And not only she felt it, but her daughter felt it as well. And her daughter said to her, Mum, you have to call Lockie. Have you checked in with him? How is he doing? He's out there on his own. He's out there at the coalface of the community, and he's meeting all sorts of energy and all sorts of stuff out there. Have you tracked that with him? Like, how's he doing? And so, yeah, that was really humbling for me personally. But overarchingly, the most humbling aspect of this is the horses. I mean, really, the horses are the most humbling aspect of this for me. The horses who haul in from sometimes out of state, many, many hours they're coming in for clinics, which I have mixed feelings about personally. Personally, right? That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing that the horse is hauled in from out of state. It just means that I want to make sure that those horses are really okay about being hauled in from out of state. See, that's another obvious thing that, had I not explained that little piece, some people might have bristled hearing me say that and started to double think whether they should bring their horse in from out of state. Please bring your horse in from out of state if your horse is really okay about traveling for that long to reach the clinic. If you're not sure that they're okay about that, well, then let's think about how we can get them okay with it, or like rethink your participation in the clinic, right? Because I'm not in the business of like exposing horses to excessive stresses so that they can stand in front of me at a clinic. Like, I'm not Jesus, guys, that's kind of important to me. And it's humbling that these horses show up in new places, surrounded by new horses, possibly doing new things for them, and how gracious, graceful, and generous they are. That's been really, really humbling. And a lot of the transformations with the horses, how they shift emotionally in a few hours, and sometimes less, is truly humbling. Next question. Did you discover new perspectives on horse-human relationships or on being an instructor? Yeah, on being an instructor, my new perspective is that I've reached a new chapter for myself as a teacher. In the past, I used to passionately tap dance for my supper, right? I used to kind of do a song and dance to try to like prove myself to people and let them know that like I've got something for you. See, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I've moved to a new place, partly because I've kind of found the people that I love working with. And I certainly want to keep finding more people that I love working with. But something's changed where I've discovered there's too many people and not enough time. And so when that occurs, I'm able to rethink my strategy as a teacher. Am I trying to please people? Am I fawning? Trying to tap dance for my supper, trying to prove myself? Or am I standing in my integrity, dispassionately guiding and facilitating an experience where people have an opportunity to learn something or not? And so I'm feeling a lot more dispassionate and a lot more reserved and a lot more like a guide and an observer of my own teaching rather than kind of getting in there and getting messy and kind of enmeshing with people in maybe not an appropriate way. I'm feeling myself being able to discern the distinct difference between me, them, their horse, and the clinic. And it's enabled me to kind of pass through all of these communities feeling more unscathed. This is one of the things Laurie coached me on, by the way. So that's a brand new perspective for me because I've been called passionate so many times it started to feel like a diss and like a not like a compliment. And so to discover that I'm deeply feeling and deeply caring and very empathic for the people around me, but if I kept being that way, it was literally going to drive me to an early grave. And so the best way that I can support people, but at the same time support myself, is to learn how to help people move through these waters of the emotional field and their animal bodies, whilst myself remaining a dispassionate guide and a benevolent captain of the horsemanship. And on the horse-human relationships, I'm finding more and more that the incongruency and discord seems to know no ends and no boundaries. And so incongruency and discord is not discipline specific. You won't find it just in one type of horse person or another. You'll kind of find it everywhere, and it wears many, many masks and many, many guises. And it's a cultural thing I'm finding that doesn't belong to individuals. It's not an individual at fault issue per se. It's more a cultural conditioning that we have been taught to be disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from each other, disconnected from our horses. So, how can people feel congruent? How can people's words and actions line up if the culture we're soaking in is conditioning us to do the opposite? And I'm finding that more and more people are struggling to embody selflessness with their horses, that they really do feel that they're not harming their horse by asking the horse to give them what they want. And I'm not saying that asking a horse to do something is automatically an ethical violation. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we are not entitled to anything from our horses, in my view. And I think training gets better when we leave that entitlement to the side and to not assume that we know our horse's experience until we have felt and observed our horse's experience. This is also like a congruency thing for me between a certain kind of horse person I'm going to match and gel with better than another. I'm a visual kinesthetic person. I struggle to understand list makers. That's who I personally struggle to understand. That's been something my whole life. It's a journey for me on my whole life. And so I've got to be myself in my business, and I'm not able to be everything for everyone. And so I can only serve people from my strengths and from my weaknesses. And so I struggle with the kind of perspective on a horse of someone who wants to make lists constantly. That's not what I'm good at. I certainly have colleagues I could refer folks to, but that's just not what I'm good at. So that's something I'd like to improve. But at the same time, I'm going to be myself. And as much as it's good for me to learn how to make lists, and I certainly do, I mean, if you look at my track record and the prolific content creation that I put out there, I'm certainly got the ability to make lists and get stuff done. But I think it's a point of view that I bring to kind of let people enter this world of feel and sort of get out of their heads in a way. I'm going to move on to the next question. What is one common thread you noticed horse people struggle with their horses? Horse people, I've noticed a common thread, really struggle to communicate. They really struggle to communicate in a way that folks will treat horses like they're an alien somehow, and that communication is a sequence of mechanical aids rather than a feeling and the way you impart that to your horses. I see that as a common thread, that feel comes first and mechanics maybe comes last. But I think we've put the cart before the horse. We've put the mechanics before the communication. And so we're trying to find a mechanical solution to a non-mechanical problem. And I think that's upside down. That's certainly one common thread I find. This is a similar question. They said, what are the similar or new patterns or themes that each clinic had? So the similar pattern I saw, and maybe this is just a Northern America issue, but underneath everyone's excitement to be there, there is an exhausted horse and horse person there as well. That underneath our adrenaline, our excitement, and our hustle is usually some form of chronic exhaustion. This is the late stage capitalist hellscape, in my view, exercising itself against equestrians' well-being and equine well-being. This is why I have a long lunch break during my clinics, because I want to introduce to people the concept of taking rest as part of their work, and that's an important part of their job as horse people, is to learn when to hold them and when to fold them, when to walk away, when to run. So, yeah, capitalist exhaustion is something I see everywhere, and something I notice in myself too. This question, and I had a few questions that were similar to this. How do you cope with being away from home for so long? Well, in my previous clinic trips, it was easier because the home I was living in at the time was rather uncomfortable and not a really fun place for me to live. Life was just really hard there. Simple things were really, really hard. There was so much that I loved about it. There was so much I was grateful for. I had community, I had horses at home, but living in a remote and off-grid location as a young business owner trying to work his family out of a poverty cycle, it was very, very, very challenging just logistically to live there. And so having a few weeks of comfortable American conveniences was a reprieve and a release in the past. But since we moved to our farm and our quality of life has improved, this whole clinic tour, I was having sort of a conflict with my spirit about that, because I just want to be at home. And yet I'm driven with this message and this mission on behalf of horses and horse people, but I want to be at home. And that was causing me a lot of spiritual, mental, emotional dis-ease. When I got in the taxi to go to the airport 6 weeks ago in the middle of April, as soon as we drove away from my farm and I watched my horses disappear in the rearview mirror, I just started to cry. So that's how I started the clinic tour, guys. I started it homesick. And I learned that if I was feeling homesick during the clinic in real time, that I had to mention it. I had to say the obvious because I respect the people who come to my clinics. They're smart, they're sensitive, they could feel that something was off with me. And so I had to just own it up front and say, I'm standing in front of you and I am homesick in real time. That's what I'm working through. It's about me, not you. Right. And so two things can be true at the same time. I can be really, really grateful and happy to be there and loving my work and loving the community and so enjoying meeting all of you. And at the same time, I can be desperately homesick and just want to be at home. This is an internal conflict and a paradox that I'm going to have to learn how to live with if I'm going to continue doing clinics in the future. And I wish to do clinics in the future. So, how do I cope with it? I have more questions than answers. Speaking with my loved one back home every day. And also, this clinic tour in particular, more than any before, in every single location, I had colleagues and friends present who felt like home and family to me. So even if that wasn't my host per se, though sometimes it was my host, even if it wasn't my host who was that close confidant of mine, there was someone who showed up for me at every single clinic, sometimes more than once. So let me go through a Rolodex of names of people who I really, really felt showed up for me in solidarity, in support, and family and kinship for me at the clinics, which made a world of difference. And so these people, of course, were Robin Vargaman, who came to the Longmont clinic, who really stood by me. And if someone needed support at the clinic, she would co-teach with me. So thank you, Robin. There was Laurie, of course, in Washington, but also in Washington, my friend Kat Lee was there. She was incredible. Tora was there. Alexa Linton was there. And so these women really stood in my corner in a way that I could really, really feel and recognize. Who else? And then there was Michelle Knapp, of course, who was with me in the Midwest, who's partnering with me in my company. So I really honor and respect and thank you, Michelle, for partnering with me and really standing in my corner in a way I really needed it. In South Carolina, my friend Kim Hallen, who's also going to be on the podcast soon, she really showed up as a colleague and as a support. And then my host from South Carolina came with me to North Carolina. So Claire Aiken, shout out to Claire. And then in New York and Gowanda, we had Christy Foley, who you're going to all meet very, very soon. Christy Foley stood up and stood with me. So that's how I've coped. I've coped not by making this an individual exploit, but leaning into the collaborative partnerships, friendships, and kinship that I do have with people in the industry. And listen, this is a brutal industry. The equestrian industry is brutal. It is so hard to find people out there in, these maverick circles we move in who will stand with you. And I feel very, very lucky to have that for this clinic tour. And the next clinic tour I go to, I don't think I'm going to be so lucky because I'm going to all new places next year. So I need to be prepared for that. I'm going to move on to the next question. This question says, do you have any specific process that helps you be accepting of your mistakes and others' mistakes? What a wonderful question. Forgiveness. When I make a mistake and I recognize that it was a mistake, I forgive myself immediately and then immediately discover what was the lesson. So I screw up, and I screw up in clinics in front of people all the time. It happens all the time. I make mistakes. If I screw up, I need to immediately recognize why, what was my lesson, if I need to repair with somebody, if my mistake affected others, I will repair that if that is appropriate. I will request a reset and forgiveness from them, though I know I'm not entitled to forgiveness from others. I will ask for it and I will apologize if my mistake affected others. And that happened at this clinic tour once or twice. It did happen where I had to say, well, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Can we reset? Can we move on from here? And both times that that happened, I did manage to reset. And if the mistake was just about me and my process, then I had to offer myself forgiveness straight away. Because if I continued carrying forwards with me the shame of my own mistakes, I would be incapacitated in a very short period of time. And so I think it's healthy and important to try and to model functional learning based upon real experimentation and a real attitude of try in front of people in real time. And the mistakes are safe to make when you're in safe company. Mistakes are only dangerous when you're not in safe company. And so I found myself, for the most part, safe at most clinics. That's not a judgment, it's just me being transparent. I felt mostly safe at most clinics, but not completely safe at all clinics. And some clinics I didn't feel safe very much, and not all the time. And so that was tougher. And so I had to forgive myself in real time over and over again for not feeling safe in front of people. It can be a really difficult predicament to be in. And so the other process I'll offer here for that is when you get stuck in something like this, what I fall back to is my technique. What do I have in my professional tool bag that enables me to go from A to B in front of a crowd of people to help you with your horses and your horsemanship, that doesn't rely upon me necessarily feeling inspired right now? So how can I just make it technical if it's not inspirational? And that's something also I teach, right? Technique is what you go to when inspiration leaves you, and inspiration is what comes to you when technique leaves you. The next question says, how do you identify and become sensitive to subliminal mistakes? Well, I think the answer is implied in the question. To understand subliminal mistakes, so subliminal, I'm understanding in this question would be very, very tiny mistakes that go under the radar, very easily under the radar. The solution here is to be sensitive. So to be sensitive to yourself, to others, to the impact you're having on others. Now that's a double-edged sword, because as soon as you make yourself sensitive to the world around you, I start to feel all sorts of feelings coming at me from the room, and I can feel those in real time. And sometimes the feelings that come at you can really knock the wind out of your sails or can be really difficult to work with. And so as soon as you start playing with these empathic muscles, the original language, the unspoken feel that passes in the air like electric between mammals without language, as soon as you tap into this, then subliminal mistakes are no longer under the radar anymore, because you are living under the radar, right? You're there, you're in that animal body that feels everything in real time. So sensitivity is my ability to identify with that. Same person also asks, how do you keep yourself healthy, happy, and functional while on the road? Well, I'm learning to lean into the support offered from my hosts, whatever they're able to offer. If they can offer accommodation, food, companionship, I'm going to lean into that rather than go out to hotels and everything. In my first clinic tour, I tried to be fully self-sufficient. So hiring cars, staying at hotels, buying all my own food, because I had this hyper independence trauma response. And I haven't always been so community minded like I am now. But then to discover that every host was like, hey, like, why don't you just come and like stay with us? And that's been really nice to feel into. And that's helped me stay a lot healthier on the road, because I'm eating better and sleeping better. And I'm surrounded by like-minded people. Also, I've learned not to travel and rest on the same day unless I had a lot of rest before the previous clinic. So a travel day or a rest day. I can't just have travel rest in between clinics unless the clinics are close together. My closest turnaround was the two clinics in the Carolinas. Going from South to North Carolina, there was one day in between those clinics. But before my South Carolina clinic, I took a full week off, like a full 6 days, where I just laid low in the low country and rested right in the middle of the tour. And so rest has been essential, and eating well and eating when I'm hungry, because I'm burning way more calories than I would normally burn while I'm doing this, because the level of energetic output I'm having to put out there sort of is exponentially greater. Like my metabolism speeds up. I get tired easier. And so I have to just food, water, rest, really, really essential while I'm on the road, and companionship if I can get it. Same person also asks, have you ever had to ask a participant to leave one of your clinics? If ever this happened, or if it did in the future, how would you know that this was necessary, and how would you handle the situation? So I'm hearing implied in this question is that I'm asked that, did I ever ask someone to leave a clinic because of their inappropriate behavior, or because they were a mismatched for the clinic and were damaging the experience of others at a clinic? So no, I've not had a participant at a clinic yet, touch wood, where they were damaging the experience of others, in my opinion, to such a degree where I had to ask them to leave, or were such an egregious mismatch to me that I had to ask them to leave. And that's certainly not because I preach to the choir everywhere I go. This clinic tour, I had a lot of people who knew me very well, more than ever before, but I had a lot of people who were meeting me for the first time at the same clinic. And I had a lot of people who were on the same page with me immediately, and then a bunch of people who really were doing a cold call. They were walking in cold. They were just curious about me. They wanted to see what I'm all about, and they really had not much of an idea about what they were stepping into. And so that's not only exceptionally brave, but very, very open-minded of them, in my view. And so I've never had to ask a person to leave for that reason. I have had to tap horses out of a clinic early for the horse's well-being if they had either reached their limit, their threshold, their energy levels for whatever reason, or their ability levels, their appropriate ability levels. I have had to tap horses early out of a clinic. So that has happened, but I've not had to exclude a person. And it is something that has sat with me. I've often thought, oh my God, can you imagine if I showed at a clinic and someone just started tearing into me in front of everyone else? What if someone just hated it or hated me and started acting in an aggressive or hostile manner to me at a clinic? If that was to happen, and if I was to identify that there was no recourse with this person, that there was no way for us to talk with each other, I would ask them or invite them to step out of the clinic, and I would contact my administrator and I would refund their ticket in full so that they could take their ticket income and express that elsewhere within the industry where they can get their needs met elsewhere. So I'm not in the business of holding on to ill-gotten gains if those gains are motivated by someone who eventually hated being there. So if that was to happen, that's exactly how I would deal with it. And I would deal with that as dispassionately, as reserved, and as calmly as possible. And then I would ask everyone who stays around at the clinic to take a deep breath with me, let us reset and move on. And then if necessary, during the question and answer section at the end of the day, I would engage the community in a discussion about compatibility, because I think this is a big issue in the industry. So many equestrian service providers struggle to stand in their integrity because they're trying to be something for everyone. They're trying to serve a local community. The local community expects, feels entitled to, or wants their local service providers to be made in their own image. But that doesn't mean the local service provider wants to provide services this way, and it can become very, very messy. And throw a dart on a map and you'll find a burned out equestrian service provider within shouting distance of that dart. I mean, truly, it's an epidemic. And so I think the solution is to encourage our professionals to be trendsetters rather than rule followers, and to encourage our professionals to stand in their integrity even when their knees shake. And so eventually that is likely, I'm hoping not, that is likely to happen for me at a clinic. And if someone ever got so lost that they found themselves at my clinic and that was not an appropriate place for them, I know somewhere I went wrong, because I'm trying to filter these experiences and these people out of my clinics. Because the paradox of safe spaces is that safe spaces are only safe because they're not safe for everybody. If I was a safe space, a safe container for people who found patient training egregious and irresponsible, if I became a safe space for people who were unwilling and hostile towards me, for me challenging them on their long-held principles and practices on behalf of their horse, which is what I do. I will challenge people on their tool use, on their equipment use, on their technique use, and their principles around their horses. That's what I'm here to do. I'm a disruptor. I'm here to interrupt dysfunctional patterns and to offer gentle solutions. But before I can offer solutions, true solutions, sometimes, often, I have to be the bad cop that tries to find an effective and respectful and kind way to interrupt patterns, So if I became a safe container for people who resented that and all of the above, then my clinic is no longer a safe space for anyone, because resentful and hostile energy has no space in safe spaces. It really doesn't. The minute you have resentful or hostile energy in a space, everybody feels it and everybody clams up. And so it is my duty, as much as possible, through my social media, through preparing people for clinics, by being honest, by being open and transparent about what I am and what I am not, I hope to filter out people for whom I would eventually have a clash of interest with. Now, I can do that as much as I can in terms of prevention, but there'll still be people who get through those filters anyway for whatever reason. And so I try to prevent all of that as much as I can. Okay, the next question. There's a lot of questions, guys, so I hope this isn't exhausting for anyone. And if it is, just press pause, come back to this later. And if you don't like any of my answers, well, you don't have to keep listening. I mean, I'd love you to, but you don't have to if you're not liking who I am. Again, I'm not trying to be everything for everyone, right? Okay, next question. And I think we're probably approaching the halfway point on the questions. How do you stay present and feeling good with so much human-related activity? As a fellow introvert, that would be challenging for me. I will name the person who asked this question, Cara. Cara, thank you for asking this question. Cara knows me very, very well, and I know Cara very, very well, so I'm not surprised she would ask me this question because she knows me. This is probably one of the most challenging aspects for me. There's a lot of energy put on me at these clinics. Now, before I sound like I'm complaining or whinging about that, I want you to know that every bit of energy that is put on me, good, bad, or otherwise, I'm grateful for it. I'm so grateful because, I mean, it feels like being seen. And that's exceptionally good for us as social creatures. But the energetic aspect of that is taxing. So I found this year sleep to be really, really important. After my most difficult clinic, I slept for 16 hours. So I slept until 8 o'clock. The clinic started at 9, slept until 8, woke up, studied my notes about my clinic participants, made sure I'd memorized certain facts about their story, their names, how long they'd been together. Had a coffee, had something very light to eat if my body felt hungry, and often I don't because there's too much cortisol in my bloodstream prior to a clinic, so I do find it stressful to stand in front of crowds. And so I go in and teach, and then at the lunch break, I take a siesta to reset. Like I'll take a 20-minute, 15-minute nap during the lunch break because I have to. And then as soon as the clinic is over, I remove myself from the environment and I'm low sensory input, try to be on my own, whether that's in the bedroom or wherever I'm staying. And I slept up to 16 hours after my most difficult clinic, straight through. 16 hours straight through. So sleep has been really, really important, but also communicating with my hosts in advance of time that I am wildly introverted and that if I am sort of in a room somewhere with my door closed, please don't take that personally or that I'm not enjoying being in their space, because I probably am. I'm just trying to recharge and take care of myself. And so far, everyone has been exceedingly accommodating and understanding about that. Next question. What is your go-to mindset prep for going into each community before the clinic, and how does that assist with holding your boundaries and ethics? So that's really good. So a couple of things here. I'm getting more and more careful about host screening. So the hosts need to jump like a few hoops before we organize a clinic. I'm not trying to make myself exclusive. I'm just trying to be very discerning about where I'm showing up and with whom and why. And so there is at least a 1 to 1.5 hour Zoom consultation with potential hosts where I outline the whole kit and caboodle. And if that continues to feel in alignment, then we confirm the clinic. They share with me what their community is like, and what sort of community I'm walking into, what sort of problems they have, what sort of people they work with, what sort of community they represent. Sometimes I represent charitable communities, rescue operations, and sometimes I'm showing up at places where everyone coming into the clinic is out of town or out of state. And we're literally starting at ground zero with a community that's flown in from all over the place. Everything up to working with primarily people who board at the same facility I'm clinicking. So it's a wide variety of people, and I need to take into account all of those variables with my host. If I think I'm walking into a very conservative community, I will take that into account in everything I do. Every now and then, I've walked into a conservative community and I didn't realize it until I was there. And sometimes I thought I was walking into a conservative community only to find out that they were very, very open and liberal towards me. So that's a little bit of a crapshoot. But if I think I'm walking into a potentially close-minded space, I have my guard up, I'll be honest. I walk in with my guard up and I walk in feeling quite reserved about the space, and I walk in feeling rather ambivalent about the potential outcome. That might taint the experience for everyone, but I'm an imperfect person and a human being, and I'm not trying to be anything other than that. So that happens, yes. And I'm not trying to do a passionate song and dance to prove myself to people anymore. I'm just trying to be myself. So if I walk into a space and who I am is not a good fit, then it means I'm not a good fit, right? And so you just got to be professional, do the best you can with what you've got, and be grateful for every little bit of humility that the horses offer. And how does that assist with holding my boundaries and ethics? Well, I'm never going to go outside of myself to fix something. My energy needs to belong to me, and everyone else's energy needs to belong to them. And we can certainly experience how others are feeling without going outside of ourselves to experience that. It's like tuning into a radio station rather than stepping into the radio in order to feel something, right? So I also make sure that I really, really focus on the horses and their participants. So if I'm feeling some kind of ways about the space that I'm in terms of the community I've walked into, whether I feel like hostile energy coming at me from the auditors, or resentful energy, or questioning energy, or people making faces at me, or something like this, which does happen. I try to create safe spaces, but I have been in spaces where this happens and probably people aren't aware that they're doing it. But if it does happen, I try not to take it personally, because that's about them, not about me. And then I'll focus on the horses and on the participants. But sometimes I can't focus on the participants because they're going through something. And so I have to then focus on the horses. So that really, really helps. That enables me to stick with my boundaries and ethics. This was an interesting question, and I'm so glad to hear it. This question says, do your clinics typically have newcomers to the concepts you are teaching, or quote unquote followers who are already familiar? It's such a basic question, I know, but I'm curious how the participants come to land at these clinics, and also how safe is it for people to come with no familiarity and have their minds opened? Who are the kinds of participants you hope to reach when you tour? Thanks for letting us submit questions. I hope someday to join a clinic and find out some of these answers myself. Such a fabulous question. So, this recent clinic tour I did, more than any that I've done before, there was a large collection of people who were very, very familiar with me, or for whom were long-term clients. But still, at least 60% of participants at this year's clinic, so that's more than 20 out of 40 participants at this year's clinics, were people who were brand new. Not like, and even out of those 60%, most of the people who were brand new to me hadn't even booked a coaching call, haven't studied an online course, they're not on the Patreon, like nothing, like a total cold room, like a cold audience, cold client who is really just using the clinic as an opportunity to get to know me. And they're like, I'm either all in or all out, I guess. So this is how they're getting introduced to me. And I'm very, very aware of that, because in advance of the clinic, I actually study the participants who are going to be there. So I have an extensive question and answer questionnaire, like an intake form, that my administrator sends out to participants before the clinic. And then Catherine, my administrator, puts together a PDF for me where I study the participants who are going to be there. So I make sure I memorize your name, your horse's name, your horse's age, your age if appropriate to do so, how long your horses have been together, and elements of your storyline, but also how aware you are of the problems your horse may or may not have, how open you are to change, self-declared, how open you are to change, how open you are to getting what you don't expect out of the clinic. So if it helps you, I can actually read out those questions that I send out to my participants. So if you continue listening until the end of this episode, why don't I finish this episode by recounting to you on the podcast the intake questions I use to learn something about you before I even meet you. So imagine you're a cold client. You've only ever watched me from afar or followed my social media, and you book into a clinic to participate, and this is how you're getting to know me. And at the first time you meet me, I look you in the eye and I call you by your name and call your horse by your name and ask you how you are that day. That's how I meet people for the first time. At least I try. I make sure I get to the clinic with enough time to visit all my participants before the clinic begins, to say good morning, ask them how they are, and I ask them if there is anything else they would like me to know about their horse before we get going. That is how I roll. And I have a lot of newcomers. In fact, almost all of the people who came to this year's clinic, whom were known clients to me, met me because they came to clinics last year and were brand new clients. And then this year they like doubled down and they showed up again. And this year they participate or they've done my programs. And so there's got to be an entry level for people, 4-dimensional entry level. Now, I do have very, very strong boundaries, but I have strong boundaries because I'm trying to keep myself safe in a really unsafe industry. And I'm trying to keep you safe in an unsafe industry. That's why I've got boundaries. And the last thing I want is for somebody to spend money on a clinic only to discover that this clinic isn't the right place for them, you know? And that doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means I'm not a good fit for them for whatever reason, right? I'm not trying to be something for everyone. And so we've got to let go of this idea that service providers need to be something for us personally. Service providers, it is up to them to define who they are. And it's up to us to vote with our feet. Is that for me or is it not? Are they for me? Are they not? And so that can be unusual for clients who are accustomed to being exposed to equestrian service providers who are occupying some form of a fawn response to their clients all the time, who are trying to reform their identity in front of their clients so that their clients like them. No, I know exactly who I am and who I am not. I know my faults. I'm aware of some of my blind spots. I'm trying to get aware of my other blind spots. And I promise you, you will witness me make a mistake at some point in our knowledge of each other. I promise you that. So just want you to know a little bit about me. But if you are a cold client at a clinic, the first time you meet me, I will know your name, I will know you by sight, and I will know your horse's name. That's my solemn vow. Next question. How do you assess and accommodate the mental and emotional needs or states of both horses and participants in a group setting, especially if they are new to you in real time? That's a great question. In the past, what I used to do was tap dance passionately so that people were disarmed by me somehow, or try to prove myself to people so that they could feel okay in my presence. But what I'm finding now is much more sustainable, more healthy for me, and ultimately more honoring towards your autonomy and your intelligence is to be a dispassionate guide, mentor, and captain within the clinic where I let you know a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, or straightforwards as you are, just like a captain of a ship, a little to the left, a little to the right, watch out for that wave. Okay, now do this, steady as she goes, to kind of be not distant and not to abandon people emotionally, but not to be bleeding out emotionally around my clients and call that care, right? Because that's what I used to do. I used to bleed out emotionally and for my clients to let them know I cared about them. And often that was unreciprocated or inappropriate. And so I find it's better to detach and let go and allow the love I have for people and for their horses to express itself differently, and make it more about them and less about me. So what I love about these clinics is it doesn't matter if you're new to me or if you're an established client many years in, that these clinics, we start at the beginning anyway. And it's fascinating to discover that some of my long-term clients who are many months or years into their study with me, when they stand in front of me in person, may or may not have a better technical application of their techniques or a grasp of their techniques than someone walking in brand new. Because often it's so exciting for them to meet me in person that it works against them. And the amount of adrenaline in their body kind of makes them depart their senses and they forget all the things they know. Or everything was working well at home, and now that they've hauled in for a clinic, they're not able to be what they hoped, dreamed, fantasized, or expected that they would be with their horse in front of me. So don't think that preaching to the choir, quote unquote, or working only with people who are comfortable with me already is actually better, because sometimes that can work against us, that they can be so full of excitement that works against them because they're unable to be present and calm for their horse and actually disciplined about their practice. Or they've come in and made an effort to come and see me because they really want to be there because they're a long-term client, but their horse didn't enjoy the journey or shows up a little bit shaken. And now they're dealing with the fallout of being a long-term client and quote unquote not performing in front of their mentor. And a lot of students have experienced teachers in the past who tied their self-worth to their students' ability to do well with the techniques they teach. I am not that teacher. I know that the minute I teach something to somebody else, it doesn't belong to me. And my confidence and self-worth as a teacher, such as it is not enmeshed or tied to my students' ability to do the things I'm guiding them through. It is theirs to do well or not well. Either way, they're going to learn something, whether they do it quote unquote well or fumble and fuss with it or fail with it or make mistakes with it. They are going to learn by the experience anyway. It's experiential learning. So I really am detached from the outcome. So being detached from the outcome, having a progressive training methodology that starts at the beginning and builds its way up, enables everyone to be on an even playing field where the checks and balances, the swings and roundabouts are like 6 to 1/2 a dozen, no matter which way you slice it, whether you're new to me or an established client. Generally speaking, there are exceptions. Generally speaking, it's an even playing field for everybody. Of course, there'll be people who will stick out from the crowd and who will go further and do better and find it easier. But that doesn't always correlate to someone who's worked with me a long time, because I like to be at home and I tend to work with clients who really enjoy being at home. And when they go out on a limb to bring their horse into a clinic, sometimes it's the first time they've ever gone somewhere with their horse, or it's the first time in a long time they've gone somewhere with their horse. And that's a great way to put your training to the test. What I have noticed, though, is that so far everyone has gone through the clinic safe. So that's my first priority, and that's my first responsibility, and I can promise you that that has always been achieved so far. Next question. How do you discern between good days and bad days? That's a really difficult question because it requires me to make sort of a black and white value judgment on what a good day or a bad day is. And there's so many variables involved. However, I have had bad days at a clinic, and sometimes that has nothing to do with the results of the people at the clinic, because I've had clinics where I didn't necessarily have a great time, but a lot of good came out of it on behalf of the horses and the people. So I learned down the track that I created long-term client partnerships with some of the people who attended or audited some of my personal least favorite places I've been to, and that I've planted seeds in communities that I never thought I would ever return to because they didn't like what I was doing. And yet I find out that I've planted a seed there and something grew there in spite of how I felt. But a bad day for me, very, very selfishly, is when I come back from a clinic and I just feel dirty, often because there's a lot of feelings stirred up in people at my clinics. It's emotional horsemanship for a reason, and I own that. I am a disruptor, and I'm here to get people to feel stuff, right? Because we're too mechanical in this day and age. And so that can be hard to navigate, especially if people start projecting their stuff onto me. It's like someone painted me a different color, and that's not my color, but they saw me that color. That's what it feels like. And I kind of feel like I have to sleep or take a shower. And that happened. Okay, how real am I going to be? That happened at this clinic tour up until the Johns Island clinic to some varying degree. A little bit more in some places, a little bit less in others. But I'd come out of the clinic feeling like I just got painted a different color than I felt like I am identifying with. That's very esoteric and maybe unfair. And I want you to know that that has everything to do with me and myself, and has nothing to do with my hosts, the participants, the horses, or the people who are there. That's just about me navigating a difficult career in real time, vulnerably in front of you. I'm giving you a peek behind the curtain here, which I promise you Every single clinician who's listening to me talk about this knows exactly what I'm talking about, but how many people are actually talking about it? Because it's like it's a taboo to talk about our feelings, but not to me. Okay, with that, I'm going to move on to the next question. Let's take a break. While we are on the subject of clinics, what purpose do clinics serve? Not serving me personally, but in the communities I go out to visit. Well, firstly, clinics are a really good proof of concept. So, trainers road test their materials to discover their public efficacy. Do they work? It's a great way to road test it. But apart from that, clinics also help form communities, perhaps strengthening existing communities, or clinics can be the inception for a brand new community. But if we are going to change horse training for the true betterment of horses, we cannot do this alone, and we cannot do this locally. We have got to use the modern materials at our disposal, get over our aversion to using technology, and find a way to stay connected to others like us all over the world, so that we can present as an internationally united front, interested in the betterment of horses and the improvement of horse training on a global scale. If you are interested in joining my community of deeply caring horse people, I have a place for you to go. Click the link in this episode description at the top and pop your name down on the list. You will then be the first to know and gain entry to Homecoming Ahead of the Curve, a 12-week group coaching program where horse riders who want to be ahead of the curve finally come home to selfless riding that puts the horse first, in a community of horse people who put the horse first, always. I really, really hope to see you there, and all you have to do, again, is click on the web link in the episode description of the episode that you're currently listening to. A website will pop up, and then you fill out the form that you see on that website. It's that simple. Click, wait, and fill out the form. If you get stuck, you can also send us an email at admin@emotionalhorsemanship.com and inform us that you wish to be on the wait list for Homecoming Ahead of the Curve, group coaching program starting in September 2024. Now, let's go back to this episode where I unpack my most recent clinic tour. That's just about me navigating a difficult career in real time, vulnerably in front of you. I'm giving you a peek behind the curtain here, which I promise you, every single clinician who's listening to me talk about this knows exactly what I'm talking about, but how many people are actually talking about it? Because it's like it's a taboo to talk about our feelings, but not to me. Okay, with that, I'm going to move on to the next question. This person asks, I'd be interested to hear if there were particular trends or patterns you noticed overall in horses and people. I think I've mentioned that already. So the exhaustion pattern I've noticed, the inability to communicate because we're treating horses like aliens. That's a trend I've noticed. And the incongruency and discord that kind of knows no bounds because we live in a society that teaches us to be disconnected all the time. So those are common threads. And that's projected onto the horses, and that causes a lot of anxiety in horses. Horses who are standing at the end of a lead rope attached to their head with a human on the end of the lead rope and they feel alone. I see that quite a bit at the beginning of the clinics. Also, this person asks, what did you feel was different this time for you and your internal experience, as well as what did you notice in returning horses and humans? What did you present differently this tour, and what would you do differently next time? What did you love? This person wants to hear anything I have to say. So I've touched on some of this. I noticed in returning horses and humans, a lot of horses made a lot of progress over the last year, a lot more relaxation, a lot more smoothness, but still more levels to uncover in people. What I felt differently this time was that a clinic tour feels different when the home I live at back home is a really great place to be. And I've got a community of clients that I really enjoy working with back home that kind of wait for me. We basically put a big pause on their work with me while I do these clinic tours. Some of them show up at the clinic tours, but not all can. And so that hits different. The clinics hit different when I feel more established in my own life. And so that's been a discord for me that I'm learning to align with or not. And I'm giving myself the ability to just be done with clinics in the future if that's what is necessary for me. I hope not. But if that would be the better solution for me, and if I could continue to do good work in the world with people, then I'm not forbidding myself from making that decision. What did I do differently this time? Well, I had the unwritten, unhorsed exercises in empathy, which gathered steam from the beginning until end and were a total experiment. And I have to stop and think if I want to do them next time. However, they probably constituted the most important messages I will have to share with the community, because I wasn't just dancing around the problems anymore. I wasn't just kind of skimming around the problems and pointing at the problems. I took a big, brave step forwards, put myself out on a limb, and stood right at the edge of the problem and invited everyone to join me and look at the ugly side of this industry, but also feel the simplicity and the honesty of the solutions to these ugly problems. And so these unwritten simulations, unhorsed simulations, were, in my opinion, a powerful exercise in empathy on behalf of our horses. It's my way of saying to people, how do you feel doing that? How do you like it? Would you like that for yourself? Would you like that for your horse? That's my way of saying it. And it brings stuff up for people. And I had to make sure that people felt that they could tap out at any moment, because I didn't want to force people to be there if it was feeling some kind of ways to them. So that was different this tour. And I have to think if I ever want to do that again. I think it would be useful, but I have to think whether it would be appropriate in certain places to do that. I had good feedback, but again, feedback is a crapshoot. I don't necessarily trust positive or negative feedback. I more trust informative feedback or more nuanced feedback, like my friend Laurie gave me. And she gave me some really good feedback about those exercises. So that was helpful. Okay. What did I love this clinic tour? I really did love meeting so many people for whom I have long-term client relationships with in my online services. I won't go into too much depth about it because, like, who cares, right? People who aren't my clients, they're like, oh, good for you. Like, who cares, right? But for me personally, that was exceedingly positive to discover that when I met these people in the flesh, we weren't meeting for the first time. And I did know their horses, and the techniques do translate, and that the connection and experience we are creating in my online services is absolutely authentic, absolutely valid, absolutely real, and absolutely transfers into the real world. I have not yet had an interaction in the flesh with long-term clients for whom it didn't translate directly from online services, and vice versa. So that was something I loved. Next question. We're getting to the bottom of the barrel here, but as I'm asking these questions, more people are adding questions as I'm answering them, and I am trying to answer all of them. Okay, buckle up, guys. This is going to be a long episode. Here we go. Next question. Do you ever come to a place where you just don't know what a person or horse needs to be happier? Do you tell them you don't know? If I don't know the answer to a question, I will say, I don't know. What the world does not need is another horse dude in a hat being a know-it-all. But if I feel like I have some information or a perspective, I will share that, willing to be wrong. Do I ever feel like I don't know what a person or a horse needs? That's hard to say. It's like, do you know something you don't know yet? There's plenty that I don't know yet. I do know that there are certain things I can't do for people at a clinic, or that they would be more appropriate for a different kind of experience with me, be that a private lesson or an ongoing partnership or a different kind of clinic. For example, I had a few people at these clinics who were more advanced riders and had horses who were in a really good place for that. But my clinics aren't a place to necessarily explore that in great depth. And so I know that part of my future, I hope, will be building the student body and the reach of my business to the point where I could create a client base or a demand for a clinic which focused on more advanced riding with feel. So that there would be a screening process so that those people could have clinics where we could sort of go to more advanced stuff, right? But these are introductory and foundational level clinics that speak on basics that are chronically overlooked. And so that's what I'm here to primarily serve. But if I ever get to a place where I just don't think I can help them anymore, has that ever happened? I'm a pretty helpful person. And it's my point of view that I will keep trying for someone until they say stop. I will keep trying for someone until they say stop or they make me say no, thank you. And if you know, you know. When I say make me say no, thank you, meaning we're just not a good fit for one another for whatever reason, because I'm not trying to be everything for everyone. And so that would be someone that I just don't think I could make them happy. So I have had interactions with people where I'm very confident I'm not able to make them happy. And all I can do is just do the best I can and then forgive myself immediately and move on. Next question. I'd be curious to know how this clinic tour shifted you. I know we all experience deep shifts in your clinic. So this person also attended a clinic. This is actually one of my hosts at a clinic. I'm going to name. This is Tracy Rainwaters. Hi, Tracy. She hosted me in Washington. So thank you for asking, Tracy. Tracy asked, I'd be curious to know how this clinic tour shifted you. I know we all experienced deep shifts in your clinics. I'd be curious to know what you learned, grateful for you and for your work. So, Tracy, at the Washington clinic, I can say we went particularly deep at that clinic because the container your farm created and the community who showed up and the strength of the people who showed up enabled me and, more importantly, the entire clinic community to go deeper on behalf of the horses. And so that was particularly fulfilling for me because I like going deep on behalf of the horses. So your clinic went very deep, but not every clinic goes that deep because a lot of people deal with fear or frustration or confusion about going that deep, because we live in a dissociated time where people have been chronically robbed of their ability to think for themselves and told not to go too deep, not to think too much, not to feel too much. And so you guys were ready to think and feel all the things. Yes, but that isn't the true story for every place. So that's a long way for me to say that not everyone experienced deep shifts in these clinics, and I don't expect them to do so because I'm not here to rearrange the furniture in people's minds if they don't consent to that, right? And even then, if they consent to it, they need to do the rearranging. I'm just here to give dispassionate feedback and guidance. So, yeah, I learned a lot about offering guidance and coaching and definitely not offering therapy. And if someone ever got to the cusp of something extremely vulnerable, the way I would signpost it, sometimes even off the microphone, I would take the microphone away, is all right, we're going to keep you with your dignity today. I'm going to help you retain your dignity through this. Take a deep breath with me. We're going to come back to the surface and we're going to make it technical for just a moment so that you can rebalance yourself. It's something like that when I've had to do that. And that doesn't happen very often. Next question also had a comment built in. I just know it will be wonderful to go to a clinic where the horse welfare is put first, i.e., hay and water provided in the actual arena. So caveat on that, not every location enables me to have hay and water in the actual arena. That is my preference. That's what I prefer. But not every host is comfortable or happy for that to happen, and I don't judge them for that. But I always try to have something either at the entrance of the arena or just outside the arena where people can break their horses with hay and water. But my favorite clinics always are the ones for the horses. When I say favorite, I mean favorite on behalf of the horse welfare, is when the host is okay and the facility arena footing is okay and not damaged if we do have hay and water inside the space. So, yeah, that's not something that happens everywhere, but I do try to make it happen to as close as my abilities will allow and my hosts will allow. What do you do in cases of extreme weather and extreme heat? I think your clinics are indoors, so other weather conditions likely not an issue. So, if I'm clinicking outdoors in a hot environment, I try to do this as early or as late in the year as possible. But I have had a couple of clinics which got pretty hot. And if that's the case, we just work slowly and, if necessary, finish early and make sure people are hydrating and hydrating their horses. The clinic in Johns Island, we were doing exercises dodging thunderstorms for the entire event, and we were completely outdoors. So I am trying to go to places that have covered spaces because it just weatherproofs the clinic. But for whatever reason, if we have to pivot and go indoors, I will offer a theory session, or we will discuss what you can do with your horses during inclement weather. So what could you do in a stable with your horse that can keep your horsemanship ticking forwards? So I always try to look for the silver lining, because my career with horses was built without ever having access to a sheltered or indoor arena very, very consistently. The longest I ever had access to an indoor arena was for 10 months, and I only used it during that one winter. So it was like a 3-4 month period during the winter when I used it, and I had to book in, and I could only book it once or twice a week for an hour at a time. So that's the limit, the exposure I've had to covered, prestigious, or privileged training environments. My entire career with horses has been done factoring in weather and conditions, and sometimes not even having training spaces at all. So that's my background. So I don't need perfect conditions, though. If we have an indoor arena that's covered, of course, I prefer that because it just makes everything more comfortable for everybody. Oh, and I've also learned to make sure that the auditors aren't sat outside. And if they are, that we've got tents set up for them. So I'm going to make sure that happened at 1 or 2 clinics where the auditors were sitting outside and we were lucky with the weather. But I'm going to make sure that doesn't ever happen again, and that there's always a tent for the auditors to sit under, always, at least for the sun, if not for the rain. Yeah? Okay. Do you notice any cultural differences in the approach to the horse? Do you have any idea where they come from? I mean, I don't want to generalize entire communities, but there is a difference when I'm clinicking in the south of North America, of America, as opposed to the Midwest, as opposed to California, as opposed to Longmont. There are some differences, but overall, people are people. And people are just trying to survive. They're just trying to be themselves. And so the cultural impact upon them, I feel it at the clinic, but I try to create an even playing field where I actually invite people to let those pressures go. Some people willingly let them go, and some people will hold on to them because that's how they feel safe, or that's how they form their identity. But I will try to encourage people to let them go, because they often have nothing to do with them. And and especially nothing to do with their horses. And I would like them to come to this very, very clean, again, dispassionate place where they're able to really feel the experience of another without projecting. So, cultural differences. Listen, I'm uncomfortable categorizing too much, but I did notice in the Midwest, I'm clinicking in blue collar communities, And I noticed how much the work sort of hamster wheel of the culture they're in did kind of translate into this sort of heaviness a little bit for them and for their horses. And I say that with empathy and respect, coming from a blue collar family myself and considering myself blue collar, frankly, working myself out of poverty cycles. And I do notice some places need me to be more clear about being on time for the clinics compared to others. And so some places will require me to really state that and hold that boundary. And on some places, it's an obvious thing I never have to talk about. And so, yeah, there are cultural differences. I sort of don't really care where they come from, except the late stage capitalist hellscape is affecting all of us, right? Yeah, let's move on from that question. I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay, I'm going to label this person because I've been talking about them on this podcast. This is actually Laurie Halliday herself, who supported me immensely during this clinic tour. Like really, really, really supported me in a way that I don't think anybody else could have, and I wouldn't expect anyone else to. But she's a particularly fabulous and unique kind of person who I'm so blessed to call a friend and a colleague. So anyway, hi, Laurie. I love you. And Laurie says, I am very interested in what you noticed on many levels. I also want to just pause here for a moment and thank you for bringing your work home as dispassionately as possible with many points of entry and with so much heart. I'm drawn to walk with you and work with you because I have a great resonance with your compass and I trust your heart medicine implicitly. Thank you for being willing to go the extra mile for the health and love of horses and their human partners. Love you so much. Well, that wasn't a question. It was just a comment. I didn't realize it wasn't a question. Okay. Laurie, thank you very much. I think it's good that your own words could be heard here, not just my words about you. So yeah, we're going to have her back on the pod soon, I think. All right. Next question. Do you have a forgiveness of self and others mantra? My Chinese medicine healer taught me, quote, I forgive myself and let the light shine through me, unquote. I've been an equine-guided psycho-spiritual development clinician for 22 years, and my inner critic still does a galloping grand entry around the arena. Thanks for all you do, etc. Thank you very much. Okay, forgiveness of self and others mantra. Yeah, I forgive myself immediately. That's my mantra. Someone else does something some kind of ways in my direction, forgive them immediately, moving on. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean I take it with me. If I make a mistake, I forgive it so that I don't take it with me. And if I forgive others, if I have to forgive others for something, it's so that I don't take them with me anymore. It's about integrating the experience in a way that enables me to take care of myself without holding shame or holding space for inappropriate connectivity and enmeshment. It's very, very, very simple, and I've said it several times in the pod already. Forgive myself immediately. It is that simple for me. Moving on, because guilt really is a highly, highly dysfunctional, complex trauma mechanism in human beings. It's highly dysfunctional. It goes nowhere. It does nothing except allow us to embody the understanding that we are not a sociopath. Great. Period. End of sentence. What other function does guilt serve? Well, it holds us to our mistakes without necessitating that we change them. And so I'd rather replace guilt with accountability and forgiveness, learning, and then moving forwards. Okay, next question. It's a little bit of a longer question. I promised you this would be a long episode, so I apologize if this is too long for you, but I'm going to keep going. A friend of mine used to be a clinician as well and go on tours. She told me the hardest part was, quote, being the most important and celebrated person for days and weeks on end, and that it got to her even when she didn't want it to. She often felt put on a pedestal, and that didn't feel good, but it was hard to not have it happen. She also felt really charged from the good energy at clinics and felt like the coming down from it was hard for her. Wow. Do you struggle with any of the same issues? When she described it to me, it sounded very challenging, like dealing with an addiction by circumstance, but then it grabbed her. It led to her quitting clinics altogether, even though the demand was there for sure. Okay, I love this question. Allow me to clarify exactly who I am. I want my business to eventually have nothing to do with my personality. That's exactly what I want. Not only do I want that, but I'm taking very active steps to exact that, becoming dispassionate at the clinics and finding ways to be a guide rather than a tap dancing, fawning, performer in front of you trying to please you and garner, curry your support and admiration of me. Instead of doing that, I am being myself, speaking truths on behalf of the horse, guiding people through a horsemanship methodology that I am in continuous development with that can bring you and your horse through to emotional balance, regardless if you ride or not. That's what I'm here to do. And so it is emotional horsemanship by Lockie Phillips, not Lockie Phillips's emotional horsemanship. Now, I understand that's not easy for everyone because people are going to understand people before they'll understand concepts. They'll understand a personality before they'll understand a method. They'll understand an individual before they'll understand a training process. And so my personality, such as it is, better, worse, or otherwise, my personality, my identity, I am simply agreeing to use it as a tool for a short period of time in my life, for a few years, and if necessary, a few decades, but I'm hoping it won't take that long. I am leveraging my personality, such as it is, with as much integrity, honesty, and authenticity as possible so that all of you can be more interested in the communities you're forming, the relationships you have with your horses and yourselves, and the methodologies and learnings you're using to get there, and are less interested in me personally. So, best case scenario at a clinic, the clinics end with all of you talking with each other, and I'm staying mostly quiet, but just guiding the conversation and creating boundaries and channels for it so that we stay on track on behalf of the horse and through the prism with I am here to deliver to you. And so, best case scenario, I become more and more in the back seat of this experience for people because I'm just not that into myself. Really, truly, it might look like something else on the outside looking in, but if you met me a few years ago, just a few short years ago, you could go through all my social media and not find a single photo of myself. And I learned that the only way I can deliver messages on behalf of the horse is if I stand in front and use my identity and my face and my whatever personality I've got left, right? In order for that to happen, because that's how other people operate. I personally don't operate in that way. I personally don't need to know who you are. I'm more interested in the process you bring. Now, I can love you very much and not like your process, and I can not really know who you are, but love your process and everything in between. But I know that other people are not going to necessarily trust your process before they trust you personally. And so that's normal. And that's one of the tropes that we all kind of have to play ball with for a while. But it's certainly a means to an end for me. So I have no interest in being the most important and celebrated person in the room. And I truly feel really uncomfortable when people stand in front of me, jumping up and down, clapping their hands, saying, I'm so excited to meet you. I feel really uncomfortable with that because I'm like, hey, babe, come back to your body. Don't fawn over me. I'm not worth it. I said to someone today, they said, I drove 11 hours to reach this clinic. And I said, are you insane? Like we joked about it. But I'm like, I'm not worth it. And they said, yes, you are. And I'm like, oh God, I really struggle to embody that. And maybe that's my self-worth conversation that I need to have with myself. If anything, dear friend, because you are a friend who asked this question, my problem is not a grandiosity complex. My problem is a self-worth problem. My problem all my life is that this is where I get really vulnerable. My problem all my life is that, do I say this? My problem all my life is that I've not felt like I was worth the ground I stood on. That's been my problem all my life. As a victim, in my experience of abuse and a survivor of abuse, it's been my conditioning since a long time to see myself as a piece of dirt and that I'm not worth it. And especially if you're a ballet dancer, your whole life is about looking at yourself harshly in the mirror when you're looking almost naked and picking yourself to pieces to improve yourself. Now, something about the humility ritual of being disciplined enough to become a high level classical dancer keeps you humble forever. And listen, go work with horses. They'll keep you humble, especially if you work gently with horses. Because if I was dominating horses, they would give me the illusion that I was better than I am. But if I'm not trying to dominate horses and I'm trying to work gently and without leverage upon horses, they will not give you the illusion that you've got anything that you don't have. And when you strip away the layers of illusion in horsemanship in real time, it builds in your own humility because you're constantly affronted by things you thought you had, but actually you didn't have them or you weren't entitled to them. And now you actually have to go through the technical process of getting them if you want them and if the horse is willing to do them with you. And so, something about the way I'm doing my work, dear friend who asked this question, is that it's really hard for me to feel like I'm a celebrity or a big shot. I don't want to be a celebrity. I want to live a peaceful life at home. That's what I want to do. I want to do good work for good people and enjoy my life. Those are my motives. I'm not here for a get rich quick scheme. These clinics come with 75% expenses relative to your ticket cost. Yes, even with 200 some people and all those tickets, 75% of those tickets go to covering my expenses to be here. So what am I here for? Right? I really believe that my intentions are altruistic and I'm not here chasing some egoic dream because I've been slapped down in my career and made more mistakes and failed more times than I care to admit, that it's kind of hard for me at this moment in time to believe that I'm worth any of this. And so that's my self-worth storyline. So my storyline is not about feeling like a charged up celebrity after the clinic. My storyline is I come home from a clinic or I walk back into my guest accommodation at the end of a day while teaching at a clinic and I'm shaking and I'm falling apart because I feel like I just spent all day screwing up, that I felt like I spent all day getting nowhere. I felt like I spent all day not being good enough. I felt like I spent all day trying and getting nowhere and making no impact. That's the demon in my head. It's not the egoic demon that says, you're all that now. Look at you, puff your chest out, stick your nose out. That's not the demon I meet when I go home. I've got the other one that says, you're a piece of shit. Who do you think you are? You screwed up that person. You screwed up that person. You screwed up that horse. You screwed up that horse. You didn't do that right. You could have said this differently. You didn't facilitate that properly. That's the merry-go-round in my head. So I don't get charged up from good energy because I'm introverted. When people throw their good energy at me, it just overwhelms me. And I say, thank you very much. And I keep it moving, right? Because that belongs to them and it is subjective at best. I'm looking for inner peace in my work as much as I can. And it's a real process for me to actually come back from a clinic, look at myself in the mirror, and take a deep breath and say, "You're okay." That I'm able to reassure myself. The same message that I ask people to give to their horses, where you pet them on the neck and say, "You're okay, mate." It's what Sani taught me, because that's what he needed. He needed someone to stroke him on his neck and say, "You're okay." And so that's what I try to do for myself after clinics. I don't struggle with exactly the same issues your friend did, but I struggle with a similar version, but it's on the opposite ends of that spectrum. All right, moving on. Mm, okay. All right. I'm going to read out this question because it does get to the heart of the issue. This person asks, and it's a long question: I would love to hear more about your thoughts on the first day versus the second day in Wisconsin. I audited for both days. You mentioned feeling uneasy the first day versus the second. I am dying to hear more about what do you mean by unsafe spaces. I hope you will share. I'm thinking Wisconsin in general is probably a bit different than the East and West Coast. I loved being there. It was all good for me, thought provoking, and there was so much I'm still processing. It might sound silly to some, but I was very uncomfortable the first day just due to me having a lot of anxiety and a hard time adjusting to new people and places. Everyone was welcoming and friendly. It was me adjusting. At the end of the day, when you had the question session, I wished I would have asked where everyone was from. The second day, I was more at ease. Your stressing, feel over mechanical responses put words to my thoughts and feelings, as do many of the things you explain. You asked questions that made me think, and the community that you are creating is helping me realize that maybe I can have a voice that doesn't align with others. Well, thank you for this question inside of a comment, because the Wisconsin clinic was really tough for me because I was hyper aware and sensitive to the energy of anxiety in the room, and I didn't know what to do with it. So my problem all my life is not that I'm struggling to feel, my problem is feeling everything and knowing what to do with it. Now, it is counterproductive if I internalize the concept of don't feel that way, suck it up, get on with it. That is toxic patriarchy, capitalism, all those bad things. That's toxic internalization that only shuts me down, and that's not a solution. If I'm sensitive, I've got to understand that it's both my talents, both serving me and informing me and teaching me, but also potentially causing problems for me. And what I've learned in my life is that our talents always show up as our biggest problems first, and you've got to learn how to hone them, train them, receive them, be informed by them. So, what I felt in Wisconsin was, I believe, what you just said was the adjusting to the environment. What I think I was experiencing was that I was the first clinician at this barn who was coming in from outside. Michelle does clinics there, but she's working with people who really know her quite well already. And she's got a much more, let's say, friendlier and more welcoming attitude towards a variety of people, maybe compared to me. She's a lot funnier than I am anyway. And I go a lot deeper to harder places than Michelle would typically go. But Michelle's also partnering with me because we're both helping each other on that journey to a certain extent. Shout out to Michelle. Love you. I love you, mean it. Um, However, it was a tricky clinic for me. Also, if you're into like solar flares and stuff, this was just before those big solar flares this year. So the Wisconsin clinic was just as that was building up, and I could feel all of it. So if you're into astrology and all that stuff, there was a lot of like universal energy swirling at that time. And I guess I felt it all. And so it was really tough because I was looking at a very stone faced crowd and yet feeling more emotional projection from a stone-faced crowd than I ever felt from, let's say, expressive Californians, right? Now, that feels like I'm getting hunted with spears and pitchforks. If someone's looking at me stone faced and yet projecting a lot of anxiety in my direction as a deeply sensitive person who's doing my best to connect with you all and be vulnerable in front of you, that was hard for me to feel in real time. And it made me speechless a few times. But I do agree with you that day 2 was totally different and we really transmuted that. And if you were at that clinic, you'll remember Ruby, Anne's horse, Ruby, coming up to me and standing at my left shoulder and basically evaporating all of that on my behalf. So, yeah, there was also some stuff happening in the background there. So, there's certainly more nuances to this situation, which I will not speak about on this podcast. I'm vulnerable about a lot, but there are still some things, believe it or not, that I am discreet about. So, there was some stuff happening in the background there which was affecting me, which had nothing to do with necessarily the auditors or the guests who were there. It had nothing to do with the guests, but there was stuff happening there in the background that I was dealing with in real time and I wasn't necessarily prepared for. So that's all I'll say on that. But Michelle and I are planning my return to Wisconsin. And next time it's not going to be a clinic, it's going to be a residency. So I'm going to stick around for longer. So we are planning that again. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up and for offering your perspective. Okay. Oh boy, there's more questions. You know what? Bugger it. I'm going to answer all of these questions. I really am. This is going to be a mega episode, guys. I'm going to answer all these questions. Okay. This question says, this year with all your clinics so far, there were quote unquote homecomers participating. Has their joining up made any difference on the various levels Laurie asked about? So homecomers in quotations refers to people who were part of the homecoming group coaching program in September through December 2023. This was my first group coaching program and it kind of went crazy and the community there has lasted long after the program's finished. And a lot of these people were showing up at the clinics this year. The difference it made having you guys from the homecoming group, the emotional horsemanship homecoming program and group there, the difference you made at the clinics was that the more of you who were there at the clinics, the safer I felt. Period. That's what it comes down to. The more of you who were there, the safer I felt, the more progressive I was able to be as a horse trainer, the more vulnerable and real and honest and authentic I was able to be as a horse trainer because you helped me feel safe in my own business. So that's the difference it made for me personally. And obviously, it goes without saying that because that's what happened, it affected everybody there. So all it takes is a few ripe bananas to get all the unripe fruit ripe. You know what I mean? It's like the reverse of all it takes is one bad apple. Well, whatever the reverse of that is what it was like having sort of my inner circle people show up in such good numbers. The next question is very simple. It says, do you use food rewards or clicker training? So I don't use clicker training. The answer to that is a no. I don't use them at clinics. I have a clicker at home, and a few times a year, the training I'm doing benefits from bringing out the clicker to create something with my horses for whatever reason. So a few times a year, I'll use a clicker, but I don't do that at clinics. I'm not going to answer why because I don't feel safe to answer why anymore in regards to that conversation and that community because, well, no, I'm not even going to give it because I'm just going to say that and move on. Sometimes at the clinics, I have used food rewards. This year, I didn't use food rewards once at the clinics because we're exploring other ways of working with our horses that doesn't require food rewards as reinforcement. without using escalating pressure. We're just trying to explore that as much as we can. But I am very food reward positive. I have used them at clinics in the past, and I use food rewards at home with my horses that I'm in long-term relationships with. But when I'm at clinics, I'm not in long-term relationships necessarily with those horses. And the people who are coming, again, we start on an even playing field and we try to start at the beginning. And I don't necessarily use food rewards at the beginning, but that's not a blanket rule. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. There are too many variables here. I know it was a very straightforward question. So to summarize, I did not use them this year, food rewards, this year at the clinics. I have used them in the past. I do have hay and water available for the horses during the long sessions where they're studying with their people. And people did take their horses to hay and water regularly during the clinic. So that is a type of food reward, but it's a hay net that's sitting in the arena or next to it. It's not the person giving the hay by hand. And I don't use clickers at my clinics. And I use them every now and then at home in my program. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'd love to know what you do if you're feeling stuck with a horse or human pair at a clinic, or if you feel your approach isn't resonating with somewhere there the way you'd like it to. Well, if something's not resonating with someone, I can't necessarily fix that, and I'm not jumping in to try to fix that for them. They have the right to not enjoy what I'm teaching. They have the right to be pissed off by me as a coach, because if you've ever had a relationship with a good coach, you're not going to like your coach all the time, because your coach's job is to work with you on the unaware parts of yourself and the unexamined aspects of your life. That's a coach's job, to actually point to the little icky mucky corners for you, with you, and say, hey, but what about this? And they'll say, I don't want to talk about that, or that's uncomfortable for me. But the coach is like, but this is what's holding you back. And so the job of a coach is often a thankless task where we're not always here to make the people we coach uncomfortable. I want people to feel safe, but I'm not necessarily trying to shelter people and horses from facing things that need to be faced, you see? So that's what I feel about people being stuck. And if when it happens in real time, I do my best to explain to them what they're doing and what that's causing for their horse in real time. So I just try to explain that you're doing this and look at the horse now. You're doing this and look at the horse now. You're doing this and look at your horse now. That's what I try to stick with. And then I track them in real time. But every now and then I've had people at clinics make faces at me or what their horse is doing or what I've shared with them. And they probably aren't aware that they're doing it. And when I say faces, I mean they're not smiling and laughing. Sometimes people will roll their eyes in my direction or sigh or look sideways like I'm a crazy person or something like this. And I don't know if they're aware of it, or if they are aware of it, if they know that I saw it, but I see it. Not only do I see it, but I feel it. Now, when that does happen, there's a part of me that's detached that goes, huh, fascinating. They spent all this money, and I've flown all the way from the other side of the world to try and help them. I've learned their name, I've learned their story, and now I'm standing in front of them trying to help them, and they'll roll their eyes. What am I supposed to do with that? And to be frank with you, I don't know what to do with that. And I think the answer is it's a stalemate in that situation. And I think many equestrian service providers make themselves sick trying to please clients for whom are in a stalemate with them. And so in that scenario, I'll go to the horse. I'll try to make sure that the horse is okay. And if the horse is okay, I think the person's most likely to be okay. I just try to give the information as best as I can, and then forgive myself immediately. Next question. How has this year changed for you compared to last year because of your move to your new home? I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but a clinic tour feels different when home is a place you don't want to leave anymore. And so my standard for the hosts I show up for, my standard for the communities I'm willing to spend my time in, my standard for the level of input I get with my hosts is a little bit higher now than it has been in the past. My own standard for what I want to give people is a little bit higher than in the past. I'm not wanting to cloak myself or disguise myself as much anymore. And I'm also thinking of ways that I can make the clinic trips shorter in duration and maybe at different times of the year so that for once I can enjoy spring at home with my horses and my loved ones. So, yeah, more questions than answers, but there's certainly been a shift for me in that capacity. Next question is, I'd like to hear about what it's like for you coming home afterwards. When I travel, especially if it's a trip where I've been more on than off, it takes me a while to settle back into normal life. How is that shift for you? Well, hopefully by the time I get home, I've built in enough rest time during the clinic tour that I'm so happy to be there and I just step back into my schedule. My trip was longer this year because I was building in rest time. I did 7 clinics this year in 6 weeks. In the past, I did 6 clinics in 3.5 weeks. So just think about that I've really stretched the time out so that I'm resting in between better. That's a double-edged sword because then I'm showing up better at the clinics, but I'm away from home for longer. So I'm also thinking that the clinic I'm delivering is an introductory clinic. And when I return, if I return to places, that I return for second and third visits to places where I really, 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 really 4-dimensionally 100% know and recognize that they are ready for me, want me there completely, and are very open for what I'm teaching. Because I don't need to keep going back to places that are like half in with me. I'm very happy to do an introductory clinic for a place that's a little edgier, that's kind of out on the fringes of the messages of emotional horsemanship that may or may not be all in yet. But if I'm taking time out of my life to return to places second or third times, it's going to be to places that are as equally invested in me as my investment in them. And then when I return second or third times, I'm going to stick around for longer. So it'll be a different format, a week long, a different format. Yes, more like residency feeling than introductory clinic feeling. But by the time I get home, I'm so ready to nap and then go play with my horses, spend time with my loved ones, hang out with my dogs, reconnect with my clients. I also structure my work schedule very, very carefully so that I have a slow roll back into my regular service schedule for online services. So that's already built into my coming home. I don't come home and then go immediately 0 to 60 the next day. I take like 2 or 3 weeks where I just very slowly increase my availability over those 2 or 3 weeks. So that's kind of built in. But yeah, I've learned how to come back home. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at homecoming. This question, I'm just going to read out the question, but I've already sort of answered that already. Because this question echoes what others have said. They'd love to hear about the internal experience during the clinics for me, as much as I feel called to share. How it feels to be the container for so much while empowering those around you to become a container of safe space as well. What I'm learning is that I can't be a container for everything. And so I can't contain you, right? I have to facilitate but not contain. I have to create but not contain. I have to guide but not contain. It's everyone else's job to contain themselves, right? Because there's too many people, not enough time and not enough energy for me to try and do that for others. And as an introvert, it would kill me if I tried. So that's what I'm learning this year. Okay. Next question. We're almost there, just a few more left. This person has a couple of comments. First, I'll read it out. First of all, thank you for all you do. I can't imagine how your heart aches being on the road so much, away from your own loves and family. Please know that it's not overlooked, that in order to connect with us, there's so much sacrifice you are making. I have so much gratitude and compassion for the sacrifice. Okay, thank you very much. Now, the question is, I'd love to hear your feedback on any trends you see, positive or negative, in the horses that struggle with looking to their human partners as leaders versus partners. And in your opinion, should we strive to be one over the other? How does it feel? How does it make you feel when they connect with you as leader versus a partner? I tend to struggle with the desire for my horse to see me as a leader versus a partner and feel like different situations he would prefer I step into one role versus the other. I would love your feedback on that subject. Yeah, I think in all friendships, be it horse to human, etc., if they're a good partnership, you have the ability to share the role of partner and leader. I know in my relationship with my boyfriend, my loved one, there are times when I step up to take a leadership role in the partnership, and sometimes where he steps up and takes a leadership role relative to what the other is going through. And I think instead of thinking of it being one or the other, I think it's good to develop both as a skill set. I think it's important to be a benevolent leader, to be able to guide, to be exacting, to be clear. There certainly comes a time where that is needed, wanted, desired, and appropriate. I do think, generally speaking, too many horse training methodologies, and I'll be frank, clinicians jump too quickly on the leadership bandwagon at the expense of the partnership bandwagon. So what I do see is a prevalence, a trend in the industry that is overcorrecting in favor of something that is called leadership, but in the end, to me, in my view, looks like steamrolling the horse in order for the person to get what they want out of the partnership. So that's not what I call leadership. Leadership is just the ability to be clear and call the shots right now. And sometimes I let horses do that, and sometimes I ask for me to do that. And I have a very progressive training methodology, which you all experienced at the clinics, where I introduce that to you. So if you've been to a clinic, you've watched it or done it, what you experienced at the clinic is my answer to creating leadership and partnership in real time. What you experienced, that's how I do it. Okay. So, yeah, I think it's good to have a bit of both and to learn when it is appropriate to use one or the other. Next question. We only have 1, 2, 3, 4 questions left. In your experience and generally speaking, who benefits most from clinic settings, the horses or the humans? Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to name this questioner. It is my colleague, Kim Allen. Hello, Kim. I love this question. In a clinic setting, I'll be really frank. In a clinic setting, the horses that benefit the most are the horses who live at the place where the clinic is hosted, because they didn't have the stresses of travel to get there. Horses who travel all the time, meaning every week, multiple times a week, if they're appropriately minded for that and they're well handled, usually they travel really, really well and they get off and they're fine. They just might be a little bit tired, but they've got good sea legs, But that's not common. The horses who travel in for the clinics struggle with the clinics the most. And so it behooves me, pun intended, that's my favorite pun, to immediately and as soon as is appropriate, triage that horse into an emotional felt sense of well-being at the clinic. Before we do anything else, horses who come in off a trailer, off a long journey to be there, the first prerequisite is that they feel safe there. And I mean, at the New York clinic, we had some horses who came in, they trailer all the time, they were well supported, they had a professional with them, they even trailered in 2 horses for the clinic, but they brought 4 horses with them, these two ladies. And these 2 horses came in pretty fractious, not knowing where they were. But by the end of the morning, they're both relaxed, and one is laying down in the arena taking REM sleep. So I don't know who's benefiting from that. Is it good that horses have a stressful experience, arrive somewhere, and then have a good experience? Yeah, it probably is good for them, but know that we are intentionally exposing them to stress to get there. Now, how much stress can you expose a horse to? Well, that depends upon the horse. Some horses have an innate capacity to handle stress well, and others don't. Some horses have been overfaced all their life and need to not be stressed out anymore by us. And some horses have been underwhelmed, underfaced all their life, and need to discover that they can rise to challenges. And so this is a multivariant issue with many moving parts. So there's no general answers here. But except for generally speaking, the horses who trailer in struggle the most initially, but they don't necessarily struggle completely all the way through. And the humans, truly, at this point in the game, I have no idea really if anyone's benefiting from these clinics. I really don't. And I'm also trying to detach myself from trying to discover if they're benefiting from it or not. I really can't be tied to the experiences others are having of me because there are too many people I'm integrating with, and there's too much to keep up with, too many energies to hold. And I'm just trying to hold energy for who's right in front of me and for myself. So that. Okay, that wasn't a question, just a comment, so I'm not going to read that one out, but it was a very lovely comment where they complimented me and said they'd love to work with me. Okay, that's very nice. I have a complicated relationship with compliments, as you're starting to discover, but I do thank you for your compliment, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I hope to see you at a clinic one day, so thank you. Okay, so this question says, when you work with people and horses in a clinic and there is so much processes happening and sharing and bonding, and then you leave everyone to travel on to the next clinic, I can imagine that it can be quite hard saying goodbye and traveling on your own. How do you handle that? And does it affect you a lot? Have you considered having someone with you as a traveling companion who is just with you in support? I love this question so much because someone's really thinking about what it's like for me, and that is quite rare. So thank you for that question. I don't want to sound like I'm whinging about my career because I'm really not. I'm grateful for every single opportunity in front of me, and I'm determined to take as many of them as I can with grace and humility. However, I get dropped into these communities all over the place, and within a short period of time, depending upon the location and upon how much I'm close with who's hosting, I learn all about you and your horses and your community, and I remember you. When I return to places, I remember names, I remember horses, I'm tracking your journey. When I hear about people who passed away compared to last year's clinic, someone who came to my clinic died in a horse-related accident this year, and it shook me. Like, I was speechless for several minutes because at the clinic I was worried for them. I remember feeling worried for this person at a clinic, and when I found out that my worry was not unfounded because they ended up being a Titanic and getting in a horrible accident that ended their life, I wish I had held that person by the hands and asked them, "Are you okay? Do you have the support you need? Do you want to be doing all this stuff with horses that your community is telling you to do? Because you don't have to do it." So that kind of stuff keeps me up at night. Leaving people, yeah, it's hard, but I've left Australia. I left my entire family behind in Australia, and I've moved countries many, many times. So I know that love is not about keeping, it's about letting go. And so the best thing I can do is come in, link arms with a local professional who's struggling to get messages out there. So they call me in to disrupt the community, because if they disrupted the community, they wouldn't have a business anymore. And so I'm the call in who's called in to link arms with them and do some emotional heavy lifting with them and link arms with them. And then we try to bring everyone and integrate everyone back together, and then I leave again and we see what they do with it. So the leaving part, by the time the clinic is over, because it is a job for me, I'm actually relieved to move on, and I'm relieved to get it done, and I'm relieved to get closer to going home. That's how it feels to me. And looking forwards to returning if that's in alignment for the people who want me back. I have considered having someone traveling with me as a companion. I want to take my boyfriend with me to all these clinics. I just can't afford it financially. I don't want to charge more for the clinics. And so one of the ways I can keep the clinics stabilized in terms of price is by traveling on my own. And so what's been great this year is that, unprompted by me, colleagues who love and support my work and my mission and me personally have shown up for me at each clinic in solidarity. And so that has meant the world to me and really done me wonders at a very personal level. So, yeah, that's been fabulous. But for the clinic tour next year, which is going to be enormous, and I'm going to go all the way around the world, I'm going to try and afford to take my boyfriend with me, take Mickey with me for at least some of the trip, even though it means I'm going to basically break even for the clinics he joins me in. I'm willing to do that because we can't be away from each other for that long anymore. We just don't want to be away from each other for that period of time. So I don't want to, because life is short and my loved ones are the most important thing to me. Last question, guys, at least for now. And then I'm going to finish the podcast by reading out the participant intake questions, and I'm going to finish it there. This question says, I'm interested in how you navigate the human's emotional processes to the discussions and principles at your clinics. I know a lot of us have strong emotional adhesions, I would almost say, to certain beliefs, practices, fears, and identities around our horse experiences. And our journey in the horse world is often as much a journey of personal development and breaking down and rebuilding our own beliefs as it is about the horses. I remember hearing you say once that you offer support and training, but not therapy, which is totally fair. I just wonder how you balance this at clinics where people might be more easily tipped over into more vulnerable states. And how do you protect both yourself and your clients from this? So I protect myself by being dispassionate and reserving myself and being a guide and not being intrusive on their internal journey. And if I notice someone starts to crumble in a way which is making them vulnerable, I will ask my colleague, often who's present with me at the clinic, to come up and stand with them so that they're not alone and they're not spotlighted. And if necessary, I will ask them to take a breath with me and let's focus on the task so that they can retain their dignity in the clinic. As far as not offering therapy, I simply won't talk to people about their trauma in a clinic environment. I don't talk with them about their trauma on student appointments, on client appointments, or on lessons. We can talk about traumatic backgrounds of their horses, but I will not talk with them about their personaltrauma.com, period. I just won't do it. I will not trauma spotlight someone. I will not encourage someone to cry more or dig deeper, because the way I conduct my clinics, feelings will be present anyway. I don't have to make a special task of it. The emotional adhesions, well, those belong to others, not to me. And if they recognize them in real time, I'll encourage them to collect those as data points. Emotional balance is about being logical about feelings and being full of feelings about logic. It's a paradox, emotional balance, right? And so that's what we're here to explore. We're here to explore emotional balance, emotional horsemanship, not trauma horsemanship, not trauma therapy horsemanship, not feel your darkest feelings horsemanship. We are here to look very, very critically at the often egregious equestrian industry that perpetuates problematic practices upon to people and horses. We are here to look very critically at that, but we're not here to talk about the way we have survived what we have survived, because we don't have to. It's already there. Okay, so as promised, rounding out this conversation, I'm going to read out the participant intake questions. So we send these out to each participant and we ask them to answer them for us. These are the questions I have this year. Next year, I will edit them. So next year, next clinic tour, they can be slightly different. So if you're coming to a clinic in the future, if you're listening to this retroactively, the questions might be different now. But these are the questions as of 2024. First question, your name and age, if you feel comfortable answering. Your horse's name, breed, age, sex, and color. How many years have you and this horse been together? What do you know about this horse's early life, ages 0 to 2 and ages 2 to 10? Please describe anything you know about their living and social conditions, training experiences, and career where applicable. What behavioral problems have you experienced with this horse that you believe are not normal? What is your favorite activity with your horse? What is your horse's favorite activity? What is your personal strength, in your opinion? What is your horse's personal strength, in your opinion? What problems do you experience at a personal level in your horsemanship, if any, e.g., confusion, fear of mistakes, fear of riding, anxiety, frustration? Share what you feel safe to share. On a scale of 1 to 5, generally, how comfortable are you being watched at a clinic by auditors? 1 being very uncomfortable, 5 being very comfortable. On a scale of 1 to 5, generally, how comfortable are you when receiving direct verbal corrections when handling and training your horse, especially when those corrections will be heard by others? 1 being very uncomfortable and 5 being very comfortable. Would you like to have a special sign you can use with me to quietly request that I give you personal feedback with the microphone turned off? Yes, no. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that your horse is ready for the clinic? 1 being not confident at all, and 5 being very confident. What are you hoping to learn and experience during the clinic? What are your expectations, if you have expectations at all? On a scale of 1 to 5, how prepared are you to potentially not get what you expected, but perhaps be offered something you did not expect? Are you open-minded to something unexpected if it is positive for you? 1 being very open to that, 1 being not open to that, 5 being very open to that. On a scale of 1 through 5, are you willing to reconsider practices and principles of training that are important to you currently and reconsider them and potentially change them? 1 being not open to that, 5 being very open to that. Do you or your horse have any pre-existing physical or mental health challenges or neurodiverse realities which need to be accommodated, considered, and supported throughout the clinic? E.g., old injuries, anxiety troubles, chronic health issues, ADHD, CTPSD. And lastly, is there anything you want Lockie to know about you and your horse prior to the clinic?